Stranger stalked our land. A little background on the events I'm going to write about. This all happened in mid-October. My family owns about 160 acres out in the middle of nowhere. Closest neighbor is a friend who he lent rent the pasture for his cattle when he needs to. Some friends and I decided we wanted to build a little cabin out there that we could hang out at. So, one weekend, one of my friends and I loaded up a tractor we were renting from his dad and headed out there. It was just me and him that weekend, as everyone else was busy at the time. We got there a little late since it took quite a while to get everything loaded and packed for the weekend. He sat about setting up our tent and I made our fire. As I did so, I made an odd discovery. There was a phone book from a few towns over, still in his plastic sleeve, right next to our fire pit. I picked it up and showed it to my friend. We both enjoyed scaring ourselves, and I made the comment that we aren't alone out here. We both laughed at it. Later that night, we're sitting around the campfire, talking and BSing. There was a big, bright moon that night, and a bit of the breeze which made the whatever leaves we were left rustle. It was a little creepy, but we enjoyed the atmosphere. We noticed, however, someone crossing through the middle of the field, their body just visible from the moonlight. At first, it was a little odd. My friend and I discussed for a few seconds if we should confront him, but I made the suggestion that he was probably just taking a shortcut across the field. Although, I didn't really like it. If we caught him doing it again, then we would confront him, we decided. The rest of the night passed pretty uneventfully. We eventually got in our tents and laid down. We were probably 20 or so feet from the fire pit, which was, by that point, burning quite low. We talked for a few minutes, and then we go silent, trying to fall asleep. As we're laying there, we hear something. It sounded like quiet footsteps walking around the fire pit. We both look at each other, silent. Then, we hear a piece of wood get thrown into the fire, and it flamed up quite a bit. I grabbed the shotgun I always kept in the tent, and quickly racked it. We heard someone run away, but by the time we got out, they were too far away. The rest of the weekend was pretty quiet, and the events of the first night seemed kind of dreamy to us. We just cleared out the area for the cabin, and cut and stacked the trees we cut for firewood. Next weekend, we get out there. My uncle was out there as well, and we went to check his game cams. This is where it got much more worrying for us. My uncle told us he was pissed because someone had stolen the batteries and SD cards out of the cameras. We told him about what happened the weekend before and then parted ways. When we got out there, he noticed that quite a bit of our wood we had cut and stacked was already gone, and we were the last people to camp out there, which means someone had come out and had themselves a fire. We then went and checked on the tractor, which we had left down there. We found it had broken into, and the chainsaw which we left in the cab had been stolen. To make a long story short, nothing else so far has happened. I was hesitant for a few weeks to continue with the cabin since we weren't there all the time. I was worried it would be an incentive for whoever was there to stay. I'm not sure if it was a transient or local or who. If for some reason anything else happens, I'll post an update. Just wanted to update and let you guys know that we let local law enforcement and the adjacent landowners know about the situation. Our friend and I also went down there to put up no trespassing signs around the property. Additionally, we hid some trail cams around the build side of the cabin, so if anyone messes around there, we can hopefully get a good picture. Thanks for all the comments, everyone, and if anything develops, I'll be sure to let you guys know. Businesscasual hitchhiker. When my son was a baby, my mother-in-law would watch him for us while we worked. Because my shift started at 6 a.m., I would pack the baby up early to drive him to Millhouse and then turn around and go right back to work. It was about 1.5 miles from Millhouse and I would travel the main road. One particular morning, I drove, traveling south, approximately 5:15 a.m. to drop the baby off to my mill. It was mid-October. and the sun wasn't quite up yet. Near the side of the road on the opposite side, I noticed an older model black vehicle sitting with no driver or passenger. In retrospect, it stuck out because it wasn't quite parked at the side of the road, but it wasn't sticking out to block traffic either. It legit looked stranded. I dropped the baby off with Mill and left to go to work, using the same main road, passing the same area, seeing the same car. But now, it's on my side of the road. Instead, I'm traveling north. I slowed down because I suddenly noticed a man standing near the front bumper of the car. He was wearing a white button-down shirt, black pants, and was holding his hands up over his head. In one hand, he was jingling a keyring with keys on it. In the other hand, it looked to be a wallet. Being very young and altruistic, I instantly felt bad for this man, because clearly, he had broken down at the side of the road with no help. To put this in perspective, back then, not everyone had cell phones, and yes, I'm old now. Altruistic me slows down as I got closer, and the man's face brightened up, making me feel even better for thinking about being a good person for helping him. Again, clearly he was a businessman who had broken down on the side of the road, likely late for work, and there I am to help, right? He approaches my car and he says to me, you've answered my prayers. Could you take me about a mile up the road? I said, sure, of course. Did your car break down? He replied with, good thing that's not my car. Stupid me then quickly reasoned that it must be his wife's car and he was just keeping his good humor with such a horrible morning. I motioned for him to get into my car and told him to put his seatbelt on. I was used to buckling the baby into his car seat and always made sure passenger buckles also. Also back then there wasn't a law for seatbelt use. The things I remember about this incident are so weird, sorry. He buckles his seatbelt, and I proceed to put the car in drive and ask him if I'm dropping him off at work or where he was going, because I want to make small talk with my passenger. Within a moment of pulling away from his car, or not his car, he leans towards me and says, so, do you want to know how many felonies I have? My heart sunk for a quick second, and I laughed, hoping he would be laughing with me. Silence. So I glanced over at him while still trying to drive and keep my composure, and he's staring at me with a deadpan stare and a smirk on his face. I instantly became panicked and angry, remembering all the useless self-defense tips I've learned, realizing that at this point in time, they would do me no good. I was in a vehicle with a stranger that I willingly let into my car. My hands got tight on the steering wheel, and before I get another thought through my head, he said to me, why'd you think that was my car on the side of the road? I'm not allowed to have a license, let alone a car, you ditzy little girl. And he was laughing, the most horrid laugh I've ever heard. To this day, I'll never forget. I slammed the brakes as soon as he called me ditzy little girl. There was barely any traffic, although I was hoping a car would have rear-ended me to signal police, or help, or anything. From the pit of my soul, I screamed, get the fuck out of my car, you motherfucker, I'll stab you. I didn't have a knife, and I don't know why I said what I said, but he unbuckled his seatbelt and dashed out of my car. I was so shaken and peeled off as fast as I could. I went straight to work and shared the morning events with my coworkers. I'm shaking right now typing this out. I couldn't even imagine the mess I was by the time I got to work. I was crying a lot. It was so horrific. After my shift, I went back the same road so I could pick up the baby from Millhouse, and that car was still there in the same spot. I pulled into the gas station. I hadn't seen it that morning because I hadn't been paying attention, and it's so darkish out that morning, and asked the cashier if she knew who that black car belonged to, and she said she had no clue. He had been there the day before, but someone must have taken the white rag off of it or it blew away, because it was gone now. A white rag tied to a side view mirror or car door means that there is a mechanical issue and please don't give me a ticket signal. I don't know if this was a national trick for motorists, but that's what people do where I'm from. I couldn't tell the cashier what happened that morning due to pure embarrassment, so I went to pick up my baby from my Millhouse and went home. I didn't take that main road again for a very long time, because business casual hitchhiker, let's not meet. The Downtown Madman. A few years back, When I was in my mid-teens, I was the rebellious type, or so I thought I was. I wore a lot of black clothing and tight jeans, long hair, the whole I hate my parents outfit. But above everything, I loved music. I've been a musician for 8 years now, and I attribute the cringe-worthy time in my life to sparking that love. With this love came the love of seeing live shows. I would go to concerts whenever I could with whoever would go with me. It was an October night when I went into the city of Philadelphia with my friend who we'll call Sarah. We arrived around 5 p.m. when the street was still active, and many people walked up and down the streets, moving from one way to another. This being a safe time for two 15-year-old kids to be alone in a possibly dangerous city. We arrived at the show, went, and had a great time. Nothing really important to note, just pure fun. After the final note had been played, it was around 11 p.m. We left the venue and entered the now darker, colder city streets. To give some perspective, we had seen a show at the Barbary, which if anyone knows this place would know it is not the best part of town. Instead of being smart and heading with the crowds towards the train station home, me, a skinny 15-year-old boy, and Sarah, a even smaller 15-year-old girl, decided it would be a good idea to go out. After walking around for what seemed like forever, we ended up at a small rundown pizza shop. We both ordered our food and sat down to eat, talking about Sarah's recent breakup and how she'll never be able to love again, teen stuff. After we finally moved to a brighter topic and things lined up a bit, Sarah was in the middle of telling some corny joke when she stopped. Her eyes seemed to go away from me, to somewhere behind me, and her smile changed to an expression of worry. Noticing this, I asked her what was wrong. This seemed to break her from the trance that she was in. This guy, a few tables down, her voice trailed off for a moment, and just as I was about to press her to continue, she spoke this time with a more upset tone. He is masturbating under the table and staring at me. For a short moment, I thought she was making some stupid-ass joke or something like that, but seeing once again the fear in her eyes showed me that she was serious. "Let's go. Now," I said. "Want to get Sarah as far from this guy as possible." We quickly threw out our trash and left. We walked fast down the now dark and empty city streets. After a block or so and no sign that the man had tried to follow us, we relaxed a little bit, falling back into our normal conversations, and the situation was quickly forgotten. We had been talking about some high school drama when Sarah saw him. He had to be 2 blocks up, and if the streets had not been so empty, she probably would never have taken notice. "That's him," she said, the fear welling up in her throat again. It took me a second to realize the situation we were now facing. There stood the man, much taller and larger than I had thought him to be, back in the poorly illuminated pizza shop, hitting his head against the wall, but not hard enough to hurt, but enough to the point where it was noticeable. We stopped dead and just stared at him, both of us trying to make sense of what in the world we were seeing. This is when I could hear him. He was muttering something unintelligible, with the occasional louder yell of some curses. "Now I know this is freaky, but it's gonna be okay. We can just go to the other side of the block and pass him," I said, trying to restore some normality to the otherwise disturbing situation. We stopped dead and just stared at him, both of us trying to make sense of what we were seeing. This is when I could hear him. He was muttering something else. Sarah was still noticeably scared, but was still somewhat calm by my sudden yet obvious realization. With this, we continued our walk towards the train station, which we would take to safety. At this point, I was fighting the facts in my head and trying to stay calm. You see, the response time for police in this part of Philadelphia at this time of night was 30 minutes at best, which meant if we were actually in any danger, we were on our own. We reached the end of the first block, and it was at this point we could begin to hear the man again. Now much more clear, we could make out more of what he was saying. He was talking to himself in an angry tone, seemingly pissed about messing something up. "I should have done it," he kept repeating. "I should have done it." At this point, we were beyond freaked out and just wanted to get home and remain unseen. We grew closer now, only a few feet from him, but on the opposite end of the block where the man grew violent, hitting his head harder and harder and yelling louder, "I should have done it," over and over again. Sarah, who now had tears welling in her eyes, let out the faintest, scared yelp, and the man stopped cold and grew instantly silent. We heard him turn to laugh ever so slightly and start running away. Thinking quick, I realized he wasn't running from us, but instead to the top of the block so he could cut us off. I grabbed Sarah by the wrist hard and pulled her behind me as fast as I could to the other side of the block and up the street. This is when we could hear him yell, "I won't hurt you if you let me fuck her." I shoved my other hand over Sarah's mouth so the man couldn't hear her sobbing. Thank God the man turned the corner onto the other side of the block. This gave us just enough time to rush by. When the man realized we passed him, he became more angry and started searching frantically for us. Being city streets, there was not many good places to hide. I was not trying to stay from our path because getting lost around here with this guy was not an option. So many things went through my head as we ran. Who was this guy? How did he follow us? And better yet, how did he manage to get ahead of us? We ran until we reached the train station. It was empty. Once we caught our breaths, I checked the train schedule. By now the time was 12:05, and the next train out wasn't for 30 minutes. This gave us no comfort, for this guy found us before, and now if he found us, we would have nowhere to hide. Sarah and I stayed silent, hiding out of view as best as we could. I held her in my arms, trying to calm her down. We sat alone on the flat floor. The silence turned every slight noise into the monster of a man we now hid from. Just as the train finally came into sight, there he was, walking down the stairs to our platform. We stayed hidden as we saw him get on the train. Once we knew he was on, we ran on a few trains down and sat slightly. We had 4 stops. Each one gave us time to freak ourselves out even more, wondering if he saw us and if we would be followed off the train. At this time, as soon as we get my connection, I called my dad, telling him he needed to get to the station as soon as he could, and explained our situation. My father, being a good man, understood and in turn may have saved us. The train pulled into the station and we booked it off and down the streets to the bottom floor. This is when we heard the man again, now chasing us down the stairs, growing closer every moment. We just made it out the door without being had by the man. When he saw my dad's car, he ran the other way. We never filed any reports because there was nothing, honestly, there was nothing the police could actually do for us. So, to the crazy rapist that attacked me and my friend, let's not meet again, okay? The strangest encounter of my life. It was October 2017 midnight. It was raining, and I was sitting on my couch watching YouTube on the TV. My dog, wonderful furball that he is, began to whine as he needed to go outside. Frustrated, I sighed, got up, threw on my flip-flops, and grabbed an umbrella. As I opened the door onto my porch, I immediately began aware that I was hearing something odd. It was a steady tone, slightly muffled by the fact that none of the windows were open, and it immediately made me uneasy. I stepped out onto my porch, and the noise became louder. It was then that I realized I was hearing whistling. I went from uneasy to confused. I tried to peer around into the inky darkness around me, but had no luck as I saw nothing. So I reached into the house and flicked on the porch light, and that's when I saw him, clad in a marionette costume and a face painted to look like a puppet. He stood in the corner of my yard and whistled. The confusion turned to annoyance as I realized this guy must have been trying to mess with me as a Halloween prank. So I walked to the big glass door on my porch, opened it, and with all the class I had been raised with, simply asked, "Dude, what's wrong with you?" The whistling stopped immediately, and he slowly turned his head to look directly at me. He gave a hollow laugh before turning on his heels and stiffly walking away. Almost soldier-like movement. I shrugged, then turned to handle my dog when I realized that my normally aggressive dog was now hidden underneath the table whining, having wet himself. The next school day, I heard whispers in the hallway of him, conversations during class. Apparently, I hadn't been the only one to see this guy, and apparently, he was quite the mover, as he was seen all over town around midnight, specifically. Can I explain what happened that night? Not specifically. I can't really be sure of it. What I can say is that it was certainly one of the oddest experiences and situations I've ever had happen to me. Housemate spanks self, leaves bloody knife in the dishwasher, and other fun things. This story benefits from a little bit of background, so let's start with my freshman year of college. I met Emily via my freshman orientation group. We were both theater majors and eager to make friends and feel less awkward and alienated in the overwhelming flurry of early university life. Got on quite well. She was maternal and gentle and sweet, always going out of her way to make sure everyone was doing alright and felt included. We spent the first few weeks of that year hanging out in my dorm room, watching cartoons and YouTube videos and talking. We had a ton of common interests, and I was really happy that I met her. However, as freshman year went on, Emily's sweet demeanor started cracking. Emily and her roommate Beth lived across the hall from me, so I got to be close with Beth as well. Beth would confide in me about the weird and upsetting things Emily did. She would randomly start sobbing and scream at Beth when she asked if she was okay, belittle Beth in front of other people. One week, we had 2 fire drills in a row because a girl in our hall's hair straightener set off the alarm. Emily started loudly screaming about how this girl's straightener should be taken away from her, and how she was an awful conceited bitch right outside of the said girl's door. Beth told Emily to calm down, and this offended Emily so much that when Beth got back to class that afternoon, Emily had constructed a cardboard partition between her half of the room and Beth's. This behavior culminated with me and my freshman year roommate standing outside of Emily's door one night, having to talk her out of slitting her wrists. We should have called the cops that night. It would have saved us years of trouble. After that suicide attempt, though, Emily started to shape up. Me, Emily, Beth, and my freshman year roommate Kitty decided to all live together in a suite the next year since we got along so well. Sophomore year went quite smoothly. Junior year this year, the 4 of us were going to live in a house together. However, a month before we were to move in, Kitty sent us a text message saying that she couldn't live in the house for financial reasons. It smelled fishy, but what could we do? We got another roommate, Roxy, who was going to share a room with Emily, since the house only had 3 bedrooms, and Beth and I had claimed the singles. Emily started causing problems as soon as we all moved in. She was ridiculously anal about cleaning, literally screaming at us and throwing things if we left a grain of rice in the sink or an empty coffee cup on the counter. She rearranged the fridge at 3 in the morning, in the process throwing out a lot of my food. I confronted her about it when I realized most of my groceries were missing, and she said, "Oh, I thought they were mine and I'd gone bad." She then proceeded to give me an absurd amount of money to replace the groceries, far more than I would need. She constructed a 30-item chore chart for us, telling us to do everything on it, every day. This behavior, coupled with her penchant for coming home angry from her job and screaming and throwing things around, regardless of whether we had guests over, drove Roxy, Beth, and I to the point of insanity. We confronted her about it, which culminated in a big fit of angry screaming and tears on her part. She got in my face and screamed at me for an hour, but eventually, we decided that we would try hard to keep the house clean for her, and she would be less threatening and abrasive all the time. We had about a week of happy, family-like living before shit really hit the fan. One Saturday in mid-October, we spent the afternoon decorating our house for Halloween. It was great. Emily had to go to work, but she said she would be back at 11, and we could watch a movie together. I was charge artist for a play at the time, so I had a ton of painting to do. I spent the rest of the day painting, and was still working in the theater at 4 in the morning, when Beth, haggard and clad in pajamas, showed up. Worried, I asked her what was going on, and she simply said that I need to come home right now. Something was up with Emily. As we walked back to the house, she explained the situation. Emily had staggered through the front door at 3:50 a.m. She stumbled up to the room she shared with Roxy, where her banging into the walls managed to wake Roxy up. Emily began screaming and tearing off all of her clothes, yelling variants of "I want to kill myself, I want to die, someone kill me," butt naked. Emily got on her bed, still screaming and crying about wanting to die, and began spanking herself. The spanking went on for about 15 minutes, while Roxy lay there in the dark, horrified, until Emily collapsed, moaning and sobbing. Her moans eventually subsided, and she passed the fuck out, completely unresponsive. Roxy gathered up her blanket and pillow, ready to sleep downstairs for the night, when she met Beth in the hallways. She explained what had happened to Beth. The two of them tried to wake Emily up, shaking her, turning the lights on and off, calling her name, but she was totally unconscious. They were worried, and that's why they came to get me. I was worried too, given Emily's history of suicide attempts, and the fact that she said she'd be home at 11 to hang out, but instead stumbled home at 3:50. When they went downstairs, they saw that Emily had pulled up the Game of Thrones DVD menu screen to the words, "Winter is coming," and as goofy as it sounds, we wondered if it was a suicide note. Emily would do that kind of thing. There were small pieces of papers and pairs of scissors all over the floor. I tried to rouse Emily when Beth and I got back to the house, but she was out. She was breathing faintly, but her body was cold to the touch. We called an ambulance, just to get things checked out. We were afraid Emily had tried to overdose, or she had mixed something else with alcohol and reacted badly to it. We tried to dress Emily before the paramedics arrived, but gave up due to her being dead weight. However, in the process of trying to sit her up so we can get some clothes on her, we noticed that her ass is covered in oozing red welts from how hard she had been spanking herself. She woke up while the paramedics were examining her, and drunkenly explained to them that while she had a history of depression, no, she never killed herself. The paramedics told us that we were good friends for having them come check her out, and she was just hammered and needed some time to sober up. They offered to take her to the mental hospital to be on a suicide watch for the night, but we said we could watch her. We were just so relieved that she was only drunk. Another decision we would come to regret, as it were. We were sitting in the living room after the medics left, when Emily stomped down the stairs, face twisted into an inhuman expression of horror. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" she screamed. She was zipping a black jacket just over her bra. She tried to scream at us for 2 hours while we tried to explain her rationale. Roxy explained to Emily how she had been spanking herself and screaming that she wanted to kill herself. I do want to kill myself," Emily replied. "There isn't a second of the day that goes by that I don't want to die." Roxy and I, both having dealt with severe depression for most of our lives, tried to explain to Emily that she should get help. There was no reason to keep being miserable all the time when antidepressants and therapy were options. In response to this, Emily crawled across the floor on all fours and wrapped both arms around my leg. Digging her fingers into my flesh, she delivered a rehearsed-sounding monologue about how, over the summer, she had stood by the highway, willing herself to jump in front of an oncoming 18-wheeler. But, she concluded, with a bitter laugh, I just didn't want to ruin their night. She started trying to provoke us, all into anger, telling us how that if we were passed out and unresponsive, she'd be a good friend and not call the medics for us. She proceeded to tell us about how we were monsters, and how waking up to a medical examination was like being raped. I was getting so angry about this that I excused myself to my room, afraid I'd react violently if I stayed there any longer. Emily came into my room about an hour later. When I went up to her, a knife in my pocket just to be safe, she grabbed me by the neck and started kissing me on the mouth, around my face, breath reeking of vodka. She squeezed the flesh out of the nape of my neck, digging her fingernails into me, and began telling me how she had resented me ever since freshman year, how she hated that I was pretty and likable and talented, and that I wasn't constantly miserable like her. She hated me since the day she met me, just pouring abuse on me while she continued to hold me and kiss me against my will. I managed to push her away, and she told me that she was going to move out, which I said was a good idea. After that, though, is where the titular events takes place. She left my room and went down to the living room where, despite my being upstairs, in my room with the door closed, I can hear her simultaneously sobbing and cackling. It was like a ragged, pained crying, and then turning into wicked witch-like laughter. She then began spanking herself again, so loudly, I could hear it like it was happening right outside my door. And though I couldn't hear this, she also trashed the living room, punching and breaking our window blinds, and throwing paper and furniture all over. The icing on the cake, though, was that she took a 10 serrated carving knife and cut deep, crooked gashes all over her arms and legs. She then stuck the knife, still covered in her blood, in the dishwasher with the rest of our dirty dishes. Roxy, Beth, and I consulted our landlord the next day. It took Emily about a week to get moved out, and in the meantime we went to the police. got a restraining order against her, and spent a few days living in protective housing in an unfurnished basement. We're back in the house now, sans Emily, and we have the locks changed. We haven't interacted with her since, and I hope I never have to. A few weeks ago, she did try to run Roxy over at a crosswalk, but Roxy fortunately escaped, and though we told the police, not much happened. It was a horrifying experience, and definitely left us all pretty traumatized. I really hope Emily gets help, but, well, I'm not gonna be the one that gets it for her. What's the weather like? Apologies for spacing in advance, I'm on my cell. Reading this thread reminds me of something that happened to me weekly over a 3-month period when I was in what must have been 5th grade growing up in Singapore. I would get home from school most days between 3:30 and 3:40, but if I had an extracurricular, it would be closer to 5. My mom was ill at the time and had to go to a doctor a lot, but would always be home by 4:30 at the latest. My dad would be home from the office around 6, unless he was teaching a night class. That of course meant that some days, I'd be home alone for an hour or so, no biggie, until the Weatherman started calling. Looking back, the idea of a dude calling a house when only the child is home sends a chill up my spine, but I was very talkative on the phone when I was little, and my parents were having problems, and I didn't have a lot of friends, so it was nice for me to have somebody to talk to. The Weatherman was a guy with what I can recall, a very musical-sounding voice and a very pristine English accent. I remember it was sometime in mid-October when the call started, because I just sung in a school performance with some friends. Anyways, he would call at around 3:45 and tell me he was calling from a faraway country, and what country was I in, and what was the weather like over there, sunny? Every phone call would start with a weather report. Oh, how lovely. Because where it was very dark, and oh, he was only calling because he had to do the weather report in a few hours. What was my name? What a pretty name, and what a lovely adult way I had of speaking on the phone. I might have conned on to the creepiness of the calls when he called once my mom had gone home in the middle of his call and hung up abruptly when he heard her ask who was speaking. I might have even caught on to its creepiness when he said he liked the color of my uniform shirt. I remember thinking, yeah, I looked it up when I told him what school I went to. Stupidly, I did not, and only realized it was actually scary what was going on when I was getting home late one day, and walked in at close to 4 p.m. to the phone ringing off the hook. I picked up the phone only to be berated by the Weatherman about how rude it was to keep a friend waiting and how bad chocolate was for one's teeth. I didn't answer the phone at 3:45 again for as long as we lived in that house, even though it would ring and ring. I got a lot of grief from my mom until I told her about the calls, after which point she made sure her appointment times never conflicted with me coming home from school. In fact, she insisted on walking me to and from the bus stop until we moved 6 months later. Needless to say, the phone call stopped. I sometimes catch myself wondering whether one of the neighbors was just a lonely old expat man who wanted a friend and thought the Weatherman ploy was just a way to talk to somebody occasionally. But then, he knew when my mom wasn't home, and when I stopped for a chocolate bar, I suppose I'm lucky. It never went beyond phone calls.